rise. Hello.
Hello.
Almost. Hello. Hello. All right. We're going to short time together. We're going to take a little journey. You ready to go on a walk with me?
Yes.
Okay. So my talk has been changed listening this morning because so many things have been said that I think are treasures for most audiences, that it's not obvious. But we've been talking about the power of conversation. We've been talking about team human. And these are blind spots out there in the world. When we read about leadership, when we read about communication, it always takes us into our head or to something external. But everything we do as human beings is coming from our humanity. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
So why do we leave it out? Why do we leave it out? So design, I started my career as a software engineer, so design was a phase, right? A process, and we had processes as well. And there was a point at which design was done. Design complete, right? Milestone. And then we went on, and the design then got kind of changed as we were implementing. And then it got touched by the marketing and salespeople. And then it went out to the customers, and you wondered what they were dealing with. So here we are doing design. And I know there's so many domains of design, so many ways to think about design and do design. But I'm going to declare a couple of principles here that I think are going to help us on this conversation of the path from design to innovation. The first principle is, and I've been spending 30 years testing this, is that all results, both personal and social, organizational, come from prior conversations. All of them. The good ones, the bad ones, the so-so ones. And so if we begin to look from that point of view, conversation goes from chatter, let's stop talking and get to work, let's get the doing going, to no, that's the doing, what it is, how you do it, is all determined in conversation. Conversations are where we begin to articulate and manifest our vision. Conversations are where we define our destination or outcome. Conversation is where we initiate. Conversation is where we coordinate. Conversation is where we evaluate. And yet, as I go out there and work in the world with leaders, managers, and companies, they see conversation as a waste of time. Are we seeing we need to shift the perspective? But their perspective has some validity because the conversations they have are not effective. They're not generative. And so if we're going to begin to look at what is the part of conversation that really generates, that's why I use the term generative leadership. So here we are in design, and sometimes your design outcome looks like this. Anybody had a design that's turned out like this? Yeah? Like we did a great concept, great idea, we really produced a thing, and then it got into the hands of someone else, and there was a design team, and you couldn't get them to get it. And then there was the sales and marketing that said, well, it has to be different. And then it goes to the user, and that's what their report is of their experience. So I have a question for us. Who's designing for whom? Is the design this thing out here, this piece of paper, this product, this concept? It's an interaction of human beings, or as Marty said this morning, human becoming. So we're going to do an examination here. Why do we design? We don't design to produce designs. We design to create value, to have an impact, to give people a new future, to have problem solved. We design for the outcome. And so we can't think that when we've completed the design milestone that the design is done. The real process to have that design have its life in the world is just beginning. So I have been exploring for over 30 years this question of how do people do that? How do leaders do that? How do teams do that? How do managers do that? Even how do design do that? When I first ran into the word design, even though I was a software engineer, when it had its biggest impact for me, when people said in a conversation I was in, you can design your life. Design became something different than a profession, right? It became something fundamental to our being human. So I want to advance that, the questions that we've explored and being able to produce design that creates that value, that impact, and that outcome. I'm going to refer to that as an innovation, particularly if the design is really something new. But design's always something new. Otherwise, we just use the old design, right? So how do we make sure that we go from design in its more limited concept to the outcome that's really valuable in the world? So I co-authored this book, The Innovator's Way, with Dr. Peter Denning. We spent 7 years asking this question. What we found was innovation is talked a lot about in the business world, but there aren't a lot of serial innovators. There's not a lot of high success. In fact, one study we found said only 4% of innovation projects achieve their objectives. What is that? What is that revealing to us? We regard that as a blind spot. When people don't have the right distinctions to take the right action, even when they're important, we work, and we don't get the results we're looking for. One of the historical stories I tell is about the discovery of germs. Before germs were acknowledged and became part of the common sense, they didn't exist. It wasn't part of the conversation. The world can have whatever it has, but our conversations reveal the world to us. And so we had doctors, nurses, healthcare workers that I believe were committed, that I believe worked their asses off, committed to heal. And at that period, the statistics show that the mortality rate, the death rate for women in childbirth was 10 times higher in hospitals than out of hospitals. And yet we had all these people committed to the outcome using the best practices of the day. Blind spot. They didn't know about germs. So when Pasteur discovered germs, he was one of the first people to use a microscope. He actually saw new things. But his brilliance wasn't pointing out something new. His brilliance was to do the experiments that says germs really do cause disease. Then other people began to have new conversations. What do we do with these germs? And we had Lister and Semmelweis produce antiseptic, right? And the practice of washing hands by surgeons before and after surgery was new. Because the reason that we had such a high mortality rate, there was no reason to wash your hands. Blindness. So when you have the car wreck, the question here is, what's the blind spot? What is it we're not seeing? What is it we have to pay attention to? And innovation has tended to have this kind of challenge. We looked and there's 10,000 books on Amazon about innovation. You'd think we have it nailed, right? And so we studied the different ways to look at innovation. And what did we find? Process, right? Some of it was mystery, the super leader, the super expert, the Steve Jobs. But a lot of it was process. Process the thing, process the step. What was missing was the conversation. So here, this diagram shows a timeline. Very simple message here. One mistake that we make in our thinking about getting to that positive result, that people are actually using what we've produced, they're producing value in the world, impact in the world from what we've done, is that many people confuse invention with innovation. Invention is creating something new. Innovation is getting people to use it. And they're totally different conversations. So if we want to go from our really cool, great concepts and ideas to people actually using and having an impact and creating value in the world, there's some new conversations we need to pay attention to. So the path of going from the invention to the innovation is a path of conversation. But let me speak a moment, because just like I was talking about germs being a new distinction that produce new action, we need to understand conversations in a new way. I've been working on these questions for 30 years. And conversations, for most people, is chatter. talking. But if we look, conversations happening in language, Nathan mentioned I was bringing new words and vocabularies. No. Much more than that is going on in a conversation. The first aspect of conversation, of language, there is what we call descriptive language and generative language. What is generative language? It's when you make something happen. It's when you change the future. And you already do that. Will you marry me? Changes the future. Yes, I will. Changes the future. No, I won't. Changes the future. You get the point? Will you pass me the salt? Thank you. We've created a piece of the future that didn't exist before the moment of speaking. It is so much a part of our lives, and our mainstream common sense is still not aware of this generative aspect. So if we're aware that we're already speaking this generative dimension of language, then what are you generating? Being generative is not something to learn. You're already generating. What are you generating? I know people that have walked the path of mastery. Everybody's heard about the path of mastery, right? 10,000 hours. It's been published over and over again, right? We all spend 10,000 hours. So we've all mastered something. I know people who have mastered resignation. I know people who have mastered resentment. Why? Because that's what they practice. So if we step back and say, what am I practicing? Awareness creates choice. We begin to look in a new way. Now, conversations are not just words. Conversations are a full body contact sport. Conversations are a performance art. And I'm going to do a quick demonstration with you here. I want you to turn to the person next to you, and one of you starts. You say, I will, however you say it, and the person who responds has to say the same two words, I will, but say it in a way that it means something totally different. I will, I will, I will. You get the point? Do it right now. I want you to feel it in your body. Okay, we got more than I will going on. Come back. Come back. Oh, I've let the genie out of the bottle. Here's the point. Conversation is not about what you say. It's about what's listened. When you understand that, you put your attention not on what you're saying, but what's happening in the audience. I'm checking you out right now. How's it going? I'm not so sure. I've getting a lot of, right? And some other reactions as well. So if we begin to see that conversations are about listening, we all have the equipment to do that. And this is one of the places we're practicing already. You are generating the future. You are generating your identity in your conversations. So we want to start paying attention to the conversations that are going to produce more of what we're looking for. So if we go, we have the work we've done with innovation. We studied serial innovators. We studied Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the internet, wrote this wonderful book on how the internet happened. And what you see when you're looking for it is conversation after conversation after conversation. And when you look at successful innovators, there begins to be a pattern. Particular conversations have to happen with particular outcomes. When you look at failures of innovation, conversations are missing. The first one's called envisioning. But envisioning here is not just seeing the possibility. Envisioning is having a story about it. Connecting to what people care about. That's what envisioning is about. Then there's the moment of showing up with an offer. Not necessarily your proposal, not necessarily what you think your offer is. Does it show up to the client, to the customer, to the user as an offer that has value for them? How do we do that? It's a particular kind of conversation. There's adoption. The whole point of making the offer is to have it accepted. The whole point of accepting the offer is that people adopt the innovation, adopt the the product, the design, and begin to move with it. And then there's the phase of sustaining. We found in every successful innovation, all of these conversations had to happen. Sustaining, integrate, because sometimes you got the coolest frickin' innovation, the coolest frickin' design, it really works, but it doesn't fit in the structure of what's around it. And we need to pay attention to that. Awareness creates choice. If you're aware these conversations need to happen, you can pay attention. So this is, if you go into that book that Nathan mentioned as being dog-eared on his part, these are the 8 conversational practices that produce innovation. The Innovator's Way is the book where you'll see that. To envision is not simply to have your possibility, it's to have a compelling story about it. And there's actually a lot of work being done on good storytelling. How do you know you're telling a good story? Listen to the listening of your audience. Then, when you make your offer, you better know your audience. You better offer something that they care about. You better offer something that they value. I don't think the dog is going to go after the carrot, right? That's where you need to start, where they're at. Don't be in your own world about how cool it is. When we are talking about value, where does value come from? Value goes all the way into the human heart. Value is not simply a number. It's not what the stock market's saying today. Value is rooted in the fundamental characteristic of being human from the perspective we found most generative, that we are creatures that care. You have a future, there's futures you want, there's futures you don't want. How does that show up in the body, in your emotions? I care. And the key is to connect to care and make the choices for taking care. This is a blind spot in our culture. When I work with students, we ask them what they care about, and most people in the US don't have a foggy idea. Nobody asked them that question. Didn't matter. It totally matters. You can't have value if you're not taking care of what people care about. You can't have satisfaction unless you've taken care of something that people care about. Value and satisfaction are what make business happen, and it's rooted in the human heart. And you can't have meaning if you don't have care. And so, missing conversation. What do we care about? What are we going to do about it? By the way, that happened to be my grandson, Noah Tetsuro Iakepa Ewan. And he's a new soldier for the future. He's a new participant in that. And we go to adopting. That's the kind of response we want to produce. And sometimes adopting is scary. Sometimes it looks like this. So part of the conversation is how do you help people to make that leap over the chasm. And finally, that sustaining is another set of conversations. I'm actually trying to change my diet, but I couldn't find one of these pictures with a spinach leaf. So we went with this one. She seemed to have some delight there. And so with that, the path, tell your story, but listen to how you're listened. And guess what? You're already doing this. You're already speaking a story, or your silence is telling a story. Offer value. Produce adoption, commitment. There's commitments along the way. Integrate and satisfy. And the final place is learning and practice. How do we learn? We practice. You're already practicing. So how do we bring our awareness to our everyday conversations? And every change that we've seen in the world from human discourse, which drives change, comes from conversations, and almost all of them started with one person. You could be that one person. And if you do, you can help people climb the mountain, see the horizon, begin to speak in ways that are generative, to gather together to take care of what they care about, and literally create the future. Thank you. Dude.
Thank you, my friend. Have a seat.
All right.
Take a moment and think about any questions you might want to have. Text it to the hashtag Gain Conference, or rather tweet it to hashtag Gain Conference. and we'll integrate it right into the conversation. We have a little bit of time still. I did have a couple questions. One of the frustrations that I have in our program is that it's so hard to teach this because you have to do it. And we haven't found, we have your book, but there's not a lot of materials out there to help people understand not just the power of generative communication and generative leadership, but literally how to do it. What are, you have a bunch of people who are probably very interested in enacting this and being in the world this way. What's your recommendation on how they can start?
Learning in a performance art and skill doesn't come from understanding. Reading the books won't do it. You got to practice. And so find the communities that are practicing. And different communities are practicing different things. We've developed one in the generative leadership place. Everybody, clasp your hands like this. You can do it. Clasp it the other way. Notice how it feels. Now I'm going to give you the real test. Cross your arms. Cross them the other way. Congratulations. This is what learning feels like. We have to practice, and we practice enough so that discomfort of wanting to go back to our old story, our old identity, our old comfort zone doesn't stop us. We have to learn to make friends with our body.
Well, and I think that's really important. I think that's why a lot of people go back to school. They have an excuse now because they want to get their money's worth for being in a learning community. But not everyone goes back to school. Not everyone can afford the time or the money.
Yeah.
So how do you create a learning community in the community you're already in?
Well, one of the advices I got 30 years ago was look who you want to learn with and from. So this body of work is being advanced in various places. Find a coach. And by a coach, I mean someone who has the eyes to see what you're doing and give you feedback. For example, in our programs, Nathan, everybody in our long programs gets a personal coach. Why? Learning the concepts isn't going to do it. The coach's job is to give you feedback on how you're doing.
Would you agree that you need to find a mentor?
Yeah.
And you need to find mentors for different skills.
Right.
But you also need to be a mentor. That's how you learn the other half of what you're doing.
Yeah, beautiful. I do programs that are 3 years, and we start out with a 3-day workshop, and people are transforming their results after the 3 days.
I've been there, I know.
Exactly. And so when you're that far ahead of the people who don't know, the clients, the customers, the students,
sure,
you can help them. And all you got to do is be honest, saying, this is new for me too, I'm learning it, but here's this awesome move you can make, this awesome place to put your attention.
Right. So we have a question actually from the audience. There it is right there. Is there a cue that tells us when to stop talking and start doing? I think all of us could use that cue. We need like hand signals or something. What
a great question. This is actually speaking from our historical understanding that talking and doing are separate, right? No, it's not about stopping talking to do. It's what is the talking that's producing the doing, right? So there's conversations for action that have certain moves. So what you want to do is move to that. What drives the action and the outcome? Agreements. Sounds so simple, but most of us don't even know we should go there. So when you've got the agreement, then move to the execution, but you're still in the conversation of how you doing? Do you need help? What's the breakdown? How do we have those honest conversations? Why? Because we're taking care of something we care about.
Yeah, I'm on the board of the oldest design firm in the world. I'm really lucky to be part of this company, Teague, in Seattle, and their motto is thinking through making, not thinking and then making, not making and then thinking, but they basically say that's how designers work. Is there's the stuff you learn beforehand, like from design research, but there's then the stuff that you learn while you're in it, while you're doing it, and you discover it. And that seems to be generative. That's where generative leadership lives.
So the generative distinctions are moments in the flow. And what you do is you notice what you're producing and you learn from it. We call it navigation, right? So the world is unfolding itself. The other person is unfolding themselves to you in every moment in new ways. Yeah. We're not trying to pack it into our structure. We're using the structure to help us look what's happening in this moment.
I want to go back to a word that you used in your presentation, care.
Yeah.
Because we have a weird relationship to this world, to this word in the world, because you can't be caught saying you don't care about something. How many people here care about homeless problem? The homeless people, who's not going to raise their hand, right? And it could be any issue, right? It could be animal welfare, et cetera. But the reality is, and this is where the power of defining these words come out, is if you're not acting, if you're not actively, spending your time, your energy, sometimes your money, helping homeless people through agencies, through direct contact, et cetera, you really aren't caring. And one of the things that I see that sometimes happens in this community is we feel like we're approaching or helping a movement or a problem or helping solving a problem by doing, for instance, a poster. And a poster isn't nothing, but a poster isn't usually a replacement for action. And so you may do a poster about an issue, but if you're not actively involved with that issue, the reality is you don't care enough about that issue. And that's a weird conversation. It's essentially a failed conversation. You can't ever raise your hand and say, I don't care about this issue, because you just look like a jerk.
Yeah.
But that's the reality.
Yeah. Let me share what we've
Say it better.
So there's caring and there's taking care. And in our culture, we find that people are really not clear about what they care about.
Yeah.
And the first answer is, I care about everything, or I don't have a foggy idea. And so when you begin to explore, the caring comes from what makes you alive. Check out your heart, your gut, and that will begin to show you. But now you face your humanity. Yeah. You're not infinite. You can't take care of everything you care about. And that's what meaning is. What am I going to choose among all the choices that are calling me? And then that's when we meet the where care meets action is in the phrase taking care. And a great question for all of us is to say, do I know what I care about, and am I taking care of what I care about? In this culture, too many people are saying, I don't know what I care about, and if I do know, I'm not taking care of it.
Yeah. So mind what you care about, because if you're not acting on the things you care about, you're essentially leading not a meaningless life, but not as meaningful a life as I think we all want to have.
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge in organizational life and out there in the marketplace is the habit of resignation. Resignation is the story, I can't make it happen.
Yeah.
And we can always make something happen. We can't make everything happen, but we can always make something happen if we take that stand and simply stop asking the question, what is it I can or can't do, and ask, what would it take to do it? A different world shows up.
Nice, great.